Welcome to This Explainer. Today we are totally decoding the hidden psychology of spending and really getting into the science behind breaking those bad financial habits. I mean, if you've ever looked at your bank account at the end of the month and thought, wait, where did all my money go? Or wondered why it's just so incredibly hard to resist that late night impulse buy, well, you are definitely in the right place. We're gonna literally look under the hood of your own brain to figure out exactly how these spending habits form, and much more importantly, how you can actually break them.
So let's kick things off with a fascinating little phenomenon that I guarantee you've experienced. Just think about this for a second. Why does the totally seamless, zero-friction checkout on your phone feel so fundamentally different than handing over cold, hard cash? Swiping a card or, double-tapping your phone screen, it barely even registers. But actually breaking a crisp $100 bill, oh yeah, that hurts. Which brings us to Section 1, the pain of paying, and how payments affect us. See, there's this massive divide between our payment methods. Over on one side, we've got cash. Cash has what we call high transparency, meaning it directly links the purchase right to the payment. You literally watch the money leave your hands. It makes the loss of that money feel painfully real. And honestly, that pain acts like a natural brake on our spending. But on the flip side, digital payments, they totally separate the joy of getting the thing from the actual financial cost of buying the thing. It's low transparency, highly disconnected. You get the instant thrill of the item right now, but the reality of the money you just spent doesn't hit you until you check your statement days later.
So the real kicker here is that this lack of friction isn't just about convenience, it fundamentally changes our behavior. Because we feel way less in control and experience a much lower psychological burden when we just tap a card or use an app, our spending naturally shoots up. It's pretty simple. The less transparent the payment, the less pain we feel. And a quick heads up, this directly leads to wildly inaccurate budgeting, super impulsive choices, and just a completely inflated willingness to pay for stuff we'd normally skip right past.
All right, moving on to Section 2, inside the habit loop, and how habits form. To truly get why this frictionless spending is so dangerous, we've got to look inside our own heads. As the pioneering psychologist William James once observed, habits make our behavior more efficient and reduce daily decisions. Think of it this way, our brains are incredibly energy-hungry organs. So to conserve mental juice, your brain actually automates nearly 50% of your daily actions right into habits. It basically wants to put your behavior on autopilot so it can save all that cognitive power for the bigger problems in your day. Now, what's really fascinating is exactly how that automation happens. It all runs on this three-part neurological sequence we call the habit loop. Step 1 is the cue. This is your trigger. Maybe it's stress, maybe it's boredom, or maybe it's literally just walking past your favorite store. Step 2 is the routine. That's the behavior itself, like buying that fancy coffee or mindlessly scrolling through an online checkout. And step 3, the reward. That's a highly satisfying release of neurochemicals that whispers to your brain, hey, that felt amazing. We should definitely remember to do that again. And this brings us to a really fascinating biological mismatch. Listen, if you've ever told yourself to just stop spending and failed, please know it is not a moral failing. It is biology. Your conscious mind, your willpower, your logic, all of that lives in the prefrontal cortex. But your habits, they're locked away in a much deeper, older part of the brain called the basal ganglia. When you try to just muscle through with willpower, your prefrontal cortex is basically fighting a losing battle against the basal ganglia, which is this incredibly efficient, subconscious autopilot system. Trying to override that autopilot with manual controls takes a ridiculous amount of effort. So what's the fuel for that autopilot system? Dopamine. Dopamine is this powerful neurotransmitter that actually strengthens neural pathways when behaviors get repeated. And it's not just about experiencing pleasure, it's heavily about motivation and learning. When modern marketing triggers a dopamine hit through the thrill of a purchase, something researchers actually call hedonic consumption, it physically reinforces those neural pathways in your brain. Eventually, that dopamine creates an intense craving before you even buy the item. It makes the urge to spend feel like absolute second nature. Let's shift gears to Section 3, the mental accounting trap and biases in spending. So as if our biology wasn't enough, it isn't just our habit loops working against us here. We also have to watch out for cognitive biases, specifically through this sneaky psychological trap called mental accounting. Let's dive into some brilliance from Nobel Prize-winning economist Richard Thaler. He explains that whenever we buy something, we actually experience two totally different kinds of value or utility. First, there's acquisition utility. That's just the raw value of the item itself compared to what you paid. But then you've got transaction utility, which is driven completely by the perceived merits of the deal. It's that huge thrill of getting a good deal compared to what you originally expected to pay, which is known as your reference price.
Let's look at a classic example that proves exactly how irrational we can be. Would you pay more for the exact same identical cold beer at a super fancy resort hotel compared to a dingy rundown grocery store? Well, studies show that overwhelmingly people say yes. They will happily pay a premium at the resort, but they'd feel completely ripped off paying that exact same price at the rundown store. Why? Because your brain's expected reference price shifts entirely based on your environment. The beer is literally identical, the acquisition utility is the exact same, but the transaction utility, it completely changes.
You can really start to see how these biases play out in our wallets, right? We assign these totally arbitrary, invisible mental budgets to different categories of spending in our heads. And when mobile payments or credit cards artificially lower that physical pain of paying we talked about earlier, our transaction utility goes right into overdrive. We see a sale, our brain lights up registering a fantastic deal, the pain of paying feels like zero, and boom, we are completely tricked into impulse buying, totally ignoring our actual financial reality. Which leads us nicely into Section 4, Breaking Bad Financial Habits and the Science of Lasting Change. Okay, so the deck is stacked, right? We're up against frictionless digital payments, our brain's deeply hardwired basal ganglia, and our own mental accounting traps. So how on earth do we override this system and stop impulsive buying from causing us so much financial and mental distress? Well, the absolute first, most crucial step is self-awareness. You have got to identify your triggers. Think back to that habit loop. You cannot change a habit until you know exactly what kicks it off. You need to become a detective in your own life and identify the specific emotional, psychological, or environmental cues that trigger your personal spending loops. Are you buying stuff because you're stressed out after work? Are you doom spending online because you're bored or feeling lonely? The real secret here is that instead of relying on sheer willpower, which we already know is a losing game, you have to work with your biology. First off, identify the underlying emotional need that the spending is actually serving. Next, modify your environment to physically add friction back in. Maybe that means deleting your saved credit card info, or hey, maybe try using cash for a whole week. You also want to reduce your exposure to triggers. Go ahead and unsubscribe from all those tempting marketing emails. Then comes the magic step. You have to consciously replace the spending routine with a brand new action that meets that exact same underlying need. So maybe go for a walk when you're stressed instead of browsing an online store. And finally, practice mindfulness. Just slow down that conscious decision-making process. Now, I'll be honest, it's not going to happen overnight, but consistency is the absolute key here. By slowing down your decisions and tackling just one habit at a time, you're actually tapping into this amazing concept called neuroplasticity. That means you are physically, literally rewriting those neural pathways in your brain over time. Every single time you experience a cue and choose your new, healthier routine instead of spending, you weaken that old autopilot pathway and you strengthen the new one. That consistency is exactly what trains your basal ganglia to finally adopt a new normal. And that brings us to the end of our explainer. We've uncovered the hidden forces working against your wallet, from the very real pain of paying to the deep biological depths of your habit loops. So we're going to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. Now that you actually understand exactly how your brain spends, what is your basal ganglia going to buy tomorrow?